Howdy, my name is Tom Hazlett, and I'm the director of a program called the Tullock Lecture. Big ideas about information, something having to do with technology markets. Many have been economists, but most actually have not innovation and entrepreneurship in technology markets, and we've done wireless and spectrum policy. We had Brian Lamb talk about innovation, big doers. And here we have somebody who's big thoughts about information markets. Shane Greenstein has been writing and networks and the social utility do this. I met Shane, I'm pretty sure this is where I met you, maybe 12 years, and a co-author of Shane's, Pablo Spiller, the inimitable Pablo Spiller. So I remember taking my pregnant wife, what's the reason for us to be here? Well, we were going to the session at the American Economics Association organized by Pablo, and I did find Shane. Shane says, no, this is the right session. I said, where's Pablo? I understand you're writing a paper with him, but he was supposed to chair the session. Well, I'm going to stand in for him. I said, well,
yes.
To which I said, isn't Uruguay landlocked? I have no idea. People to go to Chicago in January. When he
so he could go, yeah.
So his session could take place with his paper, friend. You're more than a co-author. And indeed you were. And the economics of advanced communications markets. And indeed, every other month appears in the IEEE micro publication. And he's a professor at Northwestern University, and we're delighted to hear.
All right, thank you. God, no one should ever have that. I should say his introduction that I'm writing a book about the U.S. experience during commercialization of the Internet, and I'm not finished with the book yet. I'm going to hope I can share some of the interviews with some of you. Become a historical piece because it's taken me so long, and this talk was a welcome excuse. The game plan. We're going to do a longer introduction than normal, then give you one-side remark. And I should tell you, I'm going to break all the rules for slides in that because it's the first, fill them up. I almost read from them because I don't want to forget what I wanted to say. So the core state. That's the question I'm going to go with. Just to give you a sense of a general economic principle, you find economic metaphors all over. Why would you want to examine the Internet's myths, and particularly its economic myths? I'm going to start with, upon further reflection, it seems very anomalous. It's actually a rather anomalous example. And in particular, all the other examples of government-sponsored commercialized technologies would not have led you, sweep over this very quickly, but mention the technology pork barrel by Linda Cohen and Roger Knoll. It's just mixed experiences across a wide set of technologies. And we used to think of innovation as solely being confined to the world of IT. Communications become innovative. And historically, communications was Gordian knot from those two things. And what happened and why? The question. So I thought I used to understand this, and the more I started interviewing and getting into it, the more. The other reason you might want to understand economic metaphors is because it helps you understand policy. Like it or not, lawyers that, and that's the way most lawyers think. They think through analogy and metaphor. They're taught to think that more. But here's some famous metaphors that were offered for the Internet. It's a series of tubes. Could be solved by DARPA for, and now fill in the blank, whatever you want that to be. Just as DARPA did for force that are commonly used in policy discussion. And so those are the things that I want to address. So there's the big idea part. I know I was supposed to do a big idea. So here are the two big ideas that are ownership and market structure in communications enabled what I'm just going to characterize Hayek-type uncertainty. That is to say, resolving many unknown unknowns in a Hayekian world, and that's animating a big question. The second big question in the background, merely a fortuitous accident, or can and did government policy for. So you might reasonably ask, am I going to address those big questions today? And the answer is sadly no. That we're going to use, I might, and I just don't want to overpromise but you're going to see the direction in which I'm going. And concretely, I'm going to look at 6 myths and address those 6. So why 6 ones? Second of all, as Tom said, I actually am an amateur, people believe, about the internet. And it's just really amazing what some people believe. Some of them are even myths. They actually contain grains of truth. I mean, people are not idiots. And you see, I've come to appreciate that metaphors do inform. And the other reason to do this is because I picked the 6 that seem to inform government policy, because it's Tullock lecture gave me. So there you go. Okay, so here are the 6. I'm going to try to go for it, and I tried to save the Battle War. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that one. Number 2, it was cheap and easy to transition the internet from government funding accelerated the arrival of the internet. That one's there's a one. Number 5, the commercial internet is like a highway, and number 6, the internet led to the death of a different way, and so that's the format. Okay. So a remark. We're going to go, 45-minute talk. I just have to be apologetic at the outset. Apologetic about that. First, there's a couple things. The internet is not a constant. Is supporting it. There's an era when the NSF is managing it. There's this era in transition at the end of the, even during the private era, it's in transition. And so, just to be fair and honest, we can have discussion about them, but in some level, in the talk itself, I'm going to gloss over a lot of that at some level to give you the big line. Just this is, in some sense, I have to say this before I start, because I just know if I get things wrong, which I'm certainly going to do. Okay, so 6 myths. Let's just go for it. Is there a grain of truth to this? Yeah, there is. Paul Baran's very clear that he network for sending messages. That was distinctly different from the telephone network. He's right. It stresses the inspiration over the implementation, and that's when you think about R&D policy, popular, especially a decade or 2 ago. It's less so now, but that invention of packet switching was just go over the transport layer, and we can dismiss the apps, and the transport layer is really what matters. And that it actually overlooks one of the key economic lessons of the early era, which is that there was an unusual structure of government funding for many observers today. So let's go right to it. At the beginning of NSF or NIH today, it was not peer-reviewed science. It just did not apply to the way DARPA funded the internet at the beginning. Existing military service would have reason to invest in. They deliberately set it up as they were not linked to operations. They had a vague mission to make it eventually mission critical. We're not obsessed with operations. Their aim was to start a research community. The officers had technical. They picked research stars. They funded their labs and students. There was not peer review. And frankly, it does not look anything like anything you see today. And it's important to recognize that. Research prototypes. So they did not ask for specific designs. They did not ask for deliverables. The people they funded to work towards those goals and produce workable models, things that were eventually ported. You had to be open with everybody else. It was not the Manhattan Project. It was not in one place. It was not a final project. It was not done. That meant it involved multiple groups of inventors, users, programmers, administrators, and many. Tomlinson, just to give you sort of a story to illustrate the principle, Ray Tomlinson, he's the guy who decided that we would divide email into 2 sides, one side, and on one side, and the @ sign is effectively the thing that divides responsibility. The 2-decade era of the DARPA NSF management of the network. Okay, so why did this work? Well, I can't give you a simple answer. They liked being part of this community. So Vince Cerf and Bob Kahn wrote to TCP/IP. Cerf was a student and then became a PhD and eventually became a program officer himself. About saying today that if he had been strategic in 1 years of his career, he was not working towards a tenured job somewhere. That's because to the community involved early on, it was the big game changer to understand that. The second thing that everyone will tell you, and I've gotten this through multiple interviews, it's really fascinating, is you threw it out there and your colleagues would shoot it down if it didn't work, and that was that. And people moved on. Friends and social networks get in the way. But even this was a technical meritocracy. Why else did it work? The other reason it worked is actually, now here's the deeper answer, but just to give you a sense of it, by design have a problem, which is that they're not linked to operations, so they're not linked to prices and revenues. And it's a very hard thing to manage because they just get far away from anything that's actually valuable or potentially valuable. The answer is, our inventors here had to eat what they grew. They were inventing things for their own use. And they built, and so consequently they were quite aware of if they did something badly, they'd have to live with it. That's another way to say it. And so within the environment of DARPA, that was had some nice properties in the sense that it kept them oriented towards things that were useful and not, in part, partially because many of the people involved are, again, administrators by somebody else as soon as they invent it, and if somebody else doesn't like it, it doesn't get used. The hard part was doing this at scale, to be fair. As long as it was small, it was challenging, but possible in a minute. The other thing to say, which you often hear, is that DARPA was, in fact, it's very clear DARPA was facing a set of issues. I'll say this, diffusion. In this era of computing, they happen to be the largest user of computing, and perhaps for one other firm. So the Department of Defense, but IBM was selling, so enough. And that was, if you have a sufficient investment in a large number of computers, you have to have them. It's very hard to coordinate. The Department of Defense wanted were going to be characteristics that other users would want later too, once they had part. You want to do that because you want to put your memory in one place or your computing in one place and then have the user in another. Computing systems to talk without human intervention. They wanted less vulnerability for sure. That's the thing to understand about what packet switching did for them. Now, as a byproduct, they got some other things from the research community as sort of a byproduct. They didn't ask for them, they just got them. This is also a goal, might even achieve the goal, but might get something else that they find along the way. And in this case, what we got was routers. It's going to turn out to matter. We got the documentation. Okay, so just to, like I say, I'm doing this real quick. Well, yeah, that was one of motives, but hardly the determinative one. Once the prototype work got started, more than that explains why all the collective invention and all the collective inventive efforts accomplish so much. And so, unless you understand this structure. Okay, so going to number 2. As I said, I'm doing it really pretty fast to the commercial management. Well, is there a greater truth to this? Well, yeah, that's just right. And it's at some level several fathers and others have recognized. So why is this myth problematic? Well, first of all, it's an economist that nobody ever paid a royalty to the DoD or the NSF for TCP/IP. If you make a standard in a standards process today that's in a standards consortia done by industry, they all came for free and at no cost. And so one of the problems with this is we're actually misleading about this statement, is it gives the impression that it's always easy to make these transitions, and in fact it's not. And frankly, I think it overlooks the key lesson to an economist, which is that the internet, U.S. internet, I think it's amazing that we managed to do that. I don't know how we did it. It's just amazing. And I'm going to come to that. Okay. So first of all, what's the origin? That's mostly talking about the cost of the backbone that the NSF spent, quote, is accurate. It's not meant to be an economic accounting, however. A proper economic accounting counted, which I'm not going to do. And if you're going to do that, you've got to put in our DARPA budgets that tell you the general budget, but not the specific budgets of the internet. It's going to happen anyway. It doesn't count one of the interesting features of this situation, which is in the countries that had good telephone systems, because it all worked on top of that. And then finally, the thing that's really missing from a proper economic counting is that an awful lot of the invention researchers and admins and other users. Okay, so there's also overlooks the cost of truncated exploration. I'm going to do this in 2 sides. Different economics explore different economic opportunities, is a way to say it. Government-sponsored research is very good at doing something, at looking at invention outside the ambit of what their mission is. And in this case, DARPA was not going to be interested in a whole range of problems that were outside of what they cared about. Similarly, I'm not going to go into, but let's say, once the NSF has management control, that actually leads the research community to explore a range of problems that had previously not been explored. Going to explore other things. and in particular, they're not going to look at business uses, which is the university community doesn't care about contracting. So the structure of the industry under private management is completely unexplored in this era. It's just natural. It had to happen. So how did we get privatization out of such truncated? It started as a narrow engineering project, and it's partly because the NSF-net was so successful at sorry, my notes even are very clear. They achieved scale and with undergraduates. So with this really stunning to put in the same sentence. On the one hand, they're doing internetworking at a geographic level. These are students, 19-year-olds. You may know some, right? and they. I interviewed Steve Wolf. And retrospective biases aside, very interesting guy, but they could also sense that more was possible, and that there was nothing special that the government had, no capability if the government ran its apps on a private network that private users were also. By definition, they had limited experience with what that was going to look like because of the truncated answer. What is this? It says below. Okay, you can read the slide. So it's now in the Smithsonian. The router itself is built from pretty off-the-shelf, but on the other hand, the NSF-net's internet in this place. That turns out, now the NSF's doing that to save money, right? And to get stuff in, which is that when you do the privatization, it's not hard for the private markets to figure out how to firms that were private suppliers for the government go into business naturally. Okay. Provides the private firms and what the private firms themselves want to do. That's a long story, but I'm just going to, the private firms wanted a mail system too that worked across networks. And all the networks work with one another. And he just thinks it's the funnest thing he could possibly ever do. He's a kid in a caddy shop. He's 30-year-old PhD. Eventually becomes the head of internet, Microsoft. While he's looking for a project to move up, and he knows a bit about networking, and he says, and he looks at the internet, recognizes that it gives him a way to do email that's simpler than making these proposals. And Todd eventually successfully. That also helped quite a bit here. The other thing that also helped, just to make another long story, there were a few entrepreneurs who jumped the gun. And among them PSINet and UUNet. Mind for privatizing the internet. Not surprising private firms might try to do this. Said a lot about what to expect and what they had not foreseen. That's right. That's how commercial stakes here were much larger than some of them had thought, which of course is going to lead to the next problem. How did we avoid monopolization and rent sinking? The simple answer is honest wonks. There are actually many, but let me do the simple version of the honest wonks, the acceptable use. A problem with its acceptable use policy. The problem was that NSF, anything other than the research mission of the United States. So, interpretation. Now, once IBM and MCI recognized that they got their lawyers to nicely interpret the AUP to mean nobody else had some legal things so that they could do their commercial traffic over their own back, but nobody else could. Which was to give them a name, a firm for trying to do that, because, if you were in their shoes, you would have tried to a charter to allow a mixture of traffic over the NSF backbone during this to happen. The fact was it wasn't a partisan issue. It was just honest policy wonks trying to, that's what happened. So again, to move on, was it cheap and easy to transition? Gone wrong by crashing on the shores of monopoly or rent seeking. It took many good decisions. Amazing.
No, actually, it took 3 years to get that.
To get it, yes, it actually was huge delays.
I'm so surprised the government did the right thing.
Okay.
Well, the only issue is whether the first President Bush would let Al Gore get any credit for doing something.
We'll get that.
He was actually head of it.
Okay, so government-funded accelerated the arrival of the Internet, Action 2.2, so I'll get through this one quickly. Did the government fund the arrival? It's problematic. The reason it's problematic is because it does not distinguish between the rate and direction when you think about new direction of R&D relative to the speed at which it's establishing new directions. It really can do that. It's very limited in what it can do in accelerating rates. That's the conceptual distinction. And it's a very interesting, it's, again, long story, but the answer is compared to what? And in the internet space, you can say legitimate, clear answer because private industry didn't care. And so there was very little other private. During the NSF era, it's a little more subtle because there was actually quite a lot of private R&D at the time. I always describe this as pick your favorite dystopia. The private R&D at the time, if anybody thinks this was utopia, you're really mistaken. Right? We could have gotten the SN, might have gotten MCI mail, but then if we'd gotten MCI mail, we also would have got Lotus Notes and all these other corporate email systems that were. Now there's this whole movement of very sentimental people who think the well was heaven. And look, the well was nice for its, oh, good Lord. Store and forward architectures are just awful. And they were fine for their day. But, the CompuServe, LexisNexis, the Bloomberg terminals, iApp stores, and we got actually a direction that was not anticipated, which was a government-subsidized backbone that was handed to private firms and a competitive local dial-up ISP market with regulatory norms keeping a very bright line that build apps, which what was just not, again, what anybody was forecasting. We actually got someone who really understood what was coming. The commercial firms did not see this coming. And I'm not going to like this one, but this is what's so fun about it, because there's a lot buried in this about the history of AT&T, IBM. To summarize this point is a point that many people who do Schumpeterian economics know if you go inside organizations. Misunderstanding about TCP/IP and its app base in the early era. Another thing is you have in suite to get it there, which is also was a very common thing to happen in this era. Private incentives, in the sense that what TCP/IP does is allow scale you wouldn't have gotten necessarily from a proprietary platform. So the one guy who headed IBM's internet strategy in the latter half of the 90s, wonderful guy. And I asked him what it was like to be at IBM in 1996. And it's very true. I said, so what were you able to use and what were you able not to use? And he said the interest of what they had misunderstood was how to build them. So every prototype they had, everybody had not understood was, oh, you can just take HTML, plug it. It was an architecture that nobody had forecast. Though the apps themselves and where the value of experience figured out where that was, they were able to succeed, to be quite successful as a business, but it was with a whole set of prototypes that they themselves had never explored. So it's a really very interesting interview. And accelerate the arrival of the internet, sure, but I think the really interesting point from an economist standpoint is about otherwise would not have been explored by private firms. And that doesn't mean it was guaranteed to succeed. It doesn't. That partially because of Tim Berners-Lee, but that's the next slide. Okay.
The government provided just enough money to get one direction rather than 87 or so. They were running in 7 different directions.
Yes.
They put a bottom of this, split it up, and done their own thing. But they provided just enough money that the agencies had to come together. So and that was a huge acceleration. That was
in that direction. Yeah.
5 years.
Rent seeking.
Or they would have had debt and talk and never worked.
Suggestions. This next one, if nobody objects to this, then you're asleep. I was worried that you'd be asleep by now. What's the grain of truth to this one? The internet has had an open governance structure mostly, and myth is problematic. First, it's vague. Open means many things to many people. I just hate this word open. It doesn't have unalloyed good trait. Everything should be skeptical. Second, which was really rampant in the late 90s, but it still exists today, which is that the internet doesn't follow economic. I just think that's problematic. And then finally, I think really the bigger problem with this myth is that because openness just explains everything, and it's too simple. So let's do the quick standpoint. Lack of restrictions on access to information on how the information gets used, and lack of restrictions on participation. And it's my opinion that lack of restrictions on information access and how it gets used is really the thing that mattered. They boast about the collective decision making. They go out of their way to make it collective. But I actually think the other sense in which this is misleading is this notion that less openness is less innovative. That's about it. Just to give you an example, what a leading platform firm will do, they'll design bundles of standards. And what a proprietary platform leader won't do is directions, or if they're at all omniscient, in directions that threaten their own economic status. And that's about it. It's a different kind of truncation than this kind of truncation we were talking about earlier, but that's about it. It's another one where, just look at IBM, Microsoft, Apple, Oracle, SAP, Twitter. So it was extraordinarily innovative. I just want to point out, this has just got to be wrong, because there have been many firms were there any innovative non-open firms? And the answer to that is, of course there was, and the most innovative firm ever. They had an organized platform with tools, with large app community, with a big organized everybody else in their industry being ramshackle. Okay, so I'm just setting you guys up. You know this is the lucrative new product in the computing industry ever since the System 360. Now, we didn't know it at the time, really lucrative. Computer geeks hate it when I say this, but it really was. It was extremely, okay? Okay, so that's precisely the best illustration as well.
Do we have air conditioning in here?
So, okay, now we're going to go the other way. So, why did openness matter? You look at the best innovative firm of its era, and he did not forecast the internet. Very specifically. And consequently, that was an opportunity for others. But it's not often you get to see inside of a firm exactly the way their CEO thinks, but you actually get those on the planet. This is a small digression. You know, I teach MBAs for a living. And I show them heck when I say, look, could your CEO sit down and in a month write an 8-page single what this memo does? It's a stunning on one level. Okay. On another level, he sees the two problems he's going to have. Number one, he had not invested in supporting. That's right, for a tools firm, which is a lot of Microsoft's business. That's a big problem. Number two, he correctly, give him credit. We can debate about the methods he used, but ETF was making available to anybody, even though Tim, at the end of the day, was going to establish a consortium. That's just the benefit of having unrestricted information. It allows a new direction, more valuable. That just sometimes they're more valuable. Okay, so I'm going to do this quickly. The other thing, lack of risk, one of my favorite examples, and this is just anybody remember these guys, Internet in a Box? Oh, people are afraid of the internet because it doesn't look like something familiar. Let's take a Mosaic browser. Let's put it on a box, just so our strategy is really transparent. And then all you do is you plug that disk in with this idea. That's the whole strategy. So these guys, to their credit, they got didn't go on for very long. But you get the exploration. Examples. Why does it succeed? Because you get surprisingly lucrative paths. And this is an old entrepreneurship, saw that coming. So to make a long story short, I'm going to go really fast, because I know you're going to get.
And because they could talk.
We could go to that one.
With other people, they got more excited about working.
It generated participation. That was actually my statement right at the beginning, the participant there. Yes, okay.
Through the 90s,
yeah.
people were believing.
You're not going to like the next bit. Summarize. We're going to have much more fun on the next one. So it's the openness for of innovation, and it will truncate certain kinds of activity and exploratory activity. It just will. You might get new entrepreneurial specialists looking to create value. Doesn't mean it always works, but it might. Right. I saved my last two best ones for last. Can you stay awake for 10 more minutes? Suggestive similarity between the transport layer of the internet and the geographic spread of highways. In particular, actually, even first of all, it leads to a lot of Al Gore jokes, and I have to tell you, I just get tired of these. But nonetheless, the similarity is arising from the use of the same right-of-ways to get, and really much more deeply, the economic lessons about funding the structure of privately supplied happened. First of all, here's my standing Al Gore joke, so I'll do it. What did Al Gore invent and when did he invent? What really happened? Al and his staff really never articulated a bulletproof soundbite. That running in 91. There should have been a claim about making an incremental, albeit crucial action. On the other hand, it was very crucial. So, that's the right claim. What happened is Gore and political opponents, and we've actually gotten this myth. And it's kind of funny. It was designed to foster a particular analogy about subsidizing highway systems and the internet. And I just have to tell you what happened to it. So I don't know, have you ever been on Ngram now? Ngram, library of books that Google has scanned so far. So I looked up information superhighway, and the graphs of the frequency, the appearance of that phrase in the books that Google, next to it, the IETF and Al Gore. Right, so the frequency of those phrases appearing in books. And so it shows you Al Gore, so it seems to be fading in use. I just couldn't resist. I even compared it to a couple other things. Global warming has overtaken the information superhighway, and cell phones. It's definitely overtaken in frequency. Yeah, way above cell phones. It's the scale. I mean, it's actually, yeah. Yeah, we can actually pull it. We can pull it up in a little bit. Why it ought to fade is an economic metaphor because it's misleading on an operational level. The commercial internet, the internet combines so many things. Investments, at least today, from participants. They all have to work together to get you services. It's just to identify one of them as more important than the other. From the public finance viewpoint, it's also not a useful way to think about financing broadband. We're not allowing firms to internalize their spillovers, essentially, to economic growth. We don't have any subsidy for Amazon because we don't make it particularly easy, or we don't. And the universal service issues in the internet are and so in that sense, I just don't think it's the right metaphor. As an economist, it sends you in the wrong direction. The really key issue for growth spillovers is that it's symmetric in the sense that better broadband leads to more valuable ad-supported media, blockbuster, if you will, asymmetric in the sense they've been one way, whereas the positive ones have been in both directions. And so there's
I mean, those are consumer-facing, retail-oriented.
I agree with that completely.
It would be more interesting to talk about those. Those all seem to be displacing. Whether you watch TV.
Yeah, I actually completely agree with you on that. Yeah, I'll say a little bit. In the interest of time, I wasn't going to go into it. It's just the Fogelian point is that you should thing you're looking at, and so it's sort of analytically inappropriate to give been almost as good. Okay, so
I think this is the one you really got to fix.
yeah, I knew you were going to.
Information superhighway. The comparison with the information superhighway, I wrote that was the backbone
Mm-hmm.
that then states, commercial players thinking from 1980, 85, when he actually did think that this was going to be
So
it was just this little backbone, and the magical things would happen when 100 times more money was spent by other people. 5 years ago, he'll explain to people that no, the information superhighway is not going to be built by the Twin Creeks, and no, Al Gore is not going to make sure it to your house.
So you're okay with it not being a metaphor all the time?
Well, we hear that Al Gore invented the internet.
Yeah.
That was. I mean, you should put that up there as the big one.
Okay. Actually, we're not that far apart then. Okay. All right.
You should put to make up to Al for.
Okay. Okay.
This brings up the question, I never knew, Michael, you were responsible for the 1992 cable.
I wasn't on the communications.
Wow. You got to subtract the 92 cable out that from whatever you.
No, I didn't. I'm not going there. All right. So the last reduced communication costs. There's no question. Why this myth is problematic? First of all, Francis Cairncross and okay. Look, it's also another piece of it. The internet's impact superseded all prior investments in computing, which is just in practice. This is actually getting to Fernando's. Death was never a serious possibility, and it still isn't. And I cannot tell you how many times this played. If you look at the statistics, this is actually where I've spent most of my career, actually as a statistician. Reasons for it. Number one, most of the physical capital in the United States is not evenly distributed. Most of it is sitting into existing capital. And so it gets put in the same places. Number two, most of the skilled human capital, the consequence is most of the returns end up getting concentrated in cities because most of the humans who have the skills end up being low externalities of IT specialization, which is that at various moments inside IT market, specialist on the planet was somebody who knew how to program an Oracle database and an HTML web page. You could find such people in cities, but you couldn't find them in many cities because it was just a kind of an odds combination will locate in them because they're thicker markets. It's just what happens. That's been happening for 100 years. New technology in IT has ended up inside major urban areas. That's just the simple explanation. Supply for advanced IT sitting inside of cities. It turns out as well, the internet, particularly in the how that reduces costs inside cities. So there were already tendencies towards urban leadership. They have just simply, just going to say, cite my work. Okay? So it's one place where I get to actually claim I actually know something about this. Just that it's well known that the internet has accelerated outsourcing in manufacturing and IT maintenance work. Then north to south, This is actually well known, by the way, inside firms. You can have the same, but do it east to west. It's much harder. And so the interesting question is, do medium and small catch up if they do catch up? It's a diffusion process, and that's another one that's really the internet was great for long-term economic growth because it opens up new relational geography hasn't ended. Let's just say that. Okay, finally, so I'm going to summarize because I tried to stress these myths, which is in some sense a negative thing, but did we make them later? So here are the 6 things to replace them with. Number 1, the internet's invention involved a monopoly in rent-seeking. Number 3, the government funding can and did shape the direction of innovation in internet networking technology, civilization. Number 5, the commercial internet involved shared use and partially shared governance of some geography of the internet's impact. Okay, so that's where we're headed. Did we get something on the big questions, like the Schumpeterian? Actually, by opening up a new direction, we got some of our Schumpeterian economics out of there, and it took avoiding monopolization to get there. And it also took some institutions that fostered lack of respect and uncertainty resolved. Well, did the government play any role? Yeah, again, they didn't trip entrepreneurial firms to do what they do well, which is explore new directions. In some sense, I think the wonderful thing about them, and then let it go on, which was just a wonderful way to do things, which leaves you with my last thought. So it works is often my big comment, which is we kind of got the best of both worlds. We had we had at the beginning, and market orientation, unrestricted orientation. We actually got both of these in this case, but we got both, and the combination was actually quite, we were a bit lucky too, to be fair, but we got both, and that was it. Thanks. Oh, Mike's been it's chomping at the bit. It didn't stop you.
More importantly, I worked for 5 years. Senator, 4 years in the White House. This is really helpful.
I haven't written it yet, though.
Well, it's got a lot of corrections.
Oh, yeah.
But there are memes that are wrong, and I think this can help correct it. One thing you should look at, and maybe you talk fascinating counterpoint to the question of the underlying transport network. Because that did power to seek rents. But I agree, the reason this didn't turn into a monopolized network, we'll build you a research center, and it was going to be a proprietary closed system. And at the end of the day, it was to make everybody fair. One reason was because Bill Schrader is calling us communists.
He still remembers those arguments, almost as if they happened yesterday. He was quite.
There were about 4 or 5 people who were just shining the spotlight on this process, even though it was a little bit. But the point was that it was the easiest political route was to keep the network, and the agencies were working in the same direction. They were working to get things to work together. So
have not covered the DNS system partially because other people have been there. That's
done a good job of saying how did the government run domain? We almost got that right, but it could have really.
That's fair. I understand what you're saying.
Yes.
I was actually a worker on the commercialization and privatization mailing list in the early 90s.
Oh, yeah.
Some of I would push back on some stuff about government or how government influences how you define the range of innovation.
Yeah, fair.
Innovation, but a lot of the reason why I opened this piece is the range of options that you can explore.
Yes, yeah.
So from that point of view, having government with this compelling, doing all this work, which itself has enables you to explore the options more quickly.
I'm okay with that. Yeah.
The academic network into the scale if the academics had to pay SMA prices.
But they,
that when I was doing work in the early 90s, I was working for the Japanese government on telecom policy, and the internet kind of superseded the information superhighway metaphor. In the mid-90s, laying big.
again, not the commercial internet. Yeah.
EDI and proprietary out there. They did a Galtone here in the FCC proceedings. A lot of that stuff was preceding where that really starts to get very fuzzy. We had this image before the internet came on the scene, and then
Search on info autobahn.
Yeah.
Because the Germans are doing the same thing.
To be at a point in time when some engineers believe that we need a very different kind of. Although, if you're going to talk about any new direction, the old direction probably has a lot to apply now, but we ought to be planning on.
I'll never forecast. That's certainly one lesson I learned. As a consequence of doing this, became more crystal to me than it had been before. So, and two of them are usually not too hard to define, and the third one is. The first one is unrestricted access to information. In contracts, that means there's no reach-through rights. There's no reach-through rights on using information. Making clear in advance what's coming. That one in practice is actually costly. The first two can be costly for a very large firm. And one of the things that I had not appreciated, why it mattered was that there's no transactions costs, so they're very low transactions. And that's a very distinct characteristic relative to the other networks we've had, where everything inside of it, no need for it, because they can internalize everything. And yet we have a architecture today, almost something I had not really appreciated till I did this. And also not appreciated how costly it is, particularly at the planning, like making clear in advance where you're going. That's the hard part, because then you start making. That's something that's really come across from having done this work. I have to say that I learned. On the other hand, forecasting, remark that was made earlier, when it's easier to do policy when nobody knows what the stakes are. It's part of time.
Hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah.
This common question sort of borrows on John Pino's historical need for success. Why this worked, right? There was works, there was, and so there's a temptation there, which I walked into, to see that A as a recipe for
right.
Can you find historical examples where a lot of those ingredients kind of come together in some
Artificial intelligence.
years ago?
Large amounts of money have been thrown at that, with some, but
Another appendix.
yeah.
Recipe for success sort of thing.
But to be honest, the part of this, right? So just to be very clear, is because of the Cohen and Knoll. It makes the internet quite distinct from a lot of the other examples.
Also, what I had in mind, which was
Yeah.
You can easily tell, and they did tell the story of why those approaches didn't work, but to tackle this, yet and had a lot of characteristics of the internet, yet the outcome was different and why.
I once had a casual conversation with an expert on the commercial space industry, and I've never followed this one up. Many of the same characteristics. So the people who are putting private for, et cetera, and there's an entrepreneurialism in that community, et cetera. I don't know that area well enough, and I'd actually like to explore it at some point to try to understand it. You were, yeah.
Thus far, what it's made us to highlight in the early commercialization of the internet, everyone who used to dial up to the internet in 1995, the pre-Windows 95 era, everyone used to connect to the internet from the Windows. It probably did as much to fuel the consumer-oriented commercialization.
He's Australian, yeah. Yeah.
And it could be a very interesting story to highlight and look into. Change Bill Gates' understanding of the internet.
Mosaic especially played a huge role. Yeah.
With content delivery networks and the evolution of how they're changing the internet. They're really was working on multicast TCP, and most ISPs and backbones don't even implement multi.
Boy, that's a pregnant question. There's a lot of ways to take that.
David Clark spoke on
Yeah.
this very topic 2 years ago here, so.
Layer.
We only do one big idea at a time.
Yeah.
We do 6 minutes.
My background was, why was there no great Japanese software companies? And because of your openness, I think that why they have a very different industry structure, why they didn't say the way that the internet did, because scared guys.
Yeah, right.
So on. And it's its ability to, because your transparency, the ability to see those interfaces in industry in general, and that, I think, played a role in how the internet itself evolved, because this idea of open interfaces,
Oh, that's very interesting. I don't know enough about Japan to really comment. Oh, Martin Friendsman. Yeah. I know him. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm hesitant to see what.
Yeah, well, I'm going to give you your final exam question right now.
Uh-oh, I'm going to fail.
Individual to create what we call today the internet. True, false.
True, false, or it depends.
I tell my students to wear. You see, I saw the dean left, so I open up a little bit.
For being TCP/IP compatible in our servers. That actually quite a bit, though the difficulty with that statement is, but I think they deserve a bunch of credit for that.
All the pieces that came together. Yes, PIP is very important.
But that's just really an awful piece of software. And the largest tool provider on the internet, and then didn't finish the business. They could to get to that next step, though they were actually probably closer than they.
The network today. That is to say, just look. I mean, you are talking the way of Senator Stevens. I didn't like that.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
They are too.
Yes.
That's part of it. Okay, that's obviously a big part of it. But hundreds of millions of desks.
Oh,
You're
that's
telling me
true.
those PCs would not have been connected?
They were going to be
Answer
connected.
that question right now.
There were a bunch of different ways they could have been connected. So
Andy Grove.
it could have
Maybe
been.
Andy Grove is the most important person in the.
It would have had. Yeah, it was a precondition. We would not have been able to get what we
Or
call
a
an
post
internet.
condition.
He did so many things that were.
It wasn't his talk. Bill Gates saw what nobody saw. In turn, it have to be good. You have to be ubiquitous. It's a big market. Now how doesn't that? The antitrust case was a disaster. Everybody knows that.
So we're going to keep going here.
That's not my opinion. That's his opinion.
Okay.
You make a solution of devices on the internet, and you said, well, we could have alternatives like Linux and Apache, but what we have in NT was taken from Unix, from
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Unix, which was free, important, but
Unrestricted use of information is actually the really key thing. Yeah.
it's not just
Yeah.
a lot of players, some small, some big. But, I mean, there's only a handful of people that wrote that stack. There was ubiquity in it.
Yeah. Okay.
I want to come back to it.
I didn't quite say that.
You said that it didn't change the pace of its space.
I
really have a problem with that. Did you talk to anybody with the Federal Networking Council, anybody involved? That's where there's a really interesting story. Draw the Laffer curve up there. Let me tell you what.
It's not a. I mean this. Yeah.
Exactly. And my point is the magic of what they did with the internet was they got exactly the right amount of money. You had some examples earlier. Ethanol. If that curve is taken to be the amount of innovation.
They said if they had 5 times the money, they would have done Minitel.
But they had $200 million in the NSF era.
Really important that they got just the right amount of
And they had distributed.
came together. But that really did put us so far ahead.
The other thing they did it was really smart, hard to explain to others, that it was distributed to do its own installation-based investment, which was a great way to do things because it winded investment yet again and
Distributed
but coordinated. Yeah.
This wonderful curve and say that the internet was sort of the peak of the curve. They got it right. You could say that our commercial space travel was on the left. And we were underinvesting there. There was no.
Yeah.
There's a golden spot. It doesn't matter. You've got to rephrase that.
Okay.
Jim McConnell, CIA. Days of yore, I started my career out at the FTCs like that. Bell Labs in my early career was cast a huge shadow on virtually on in the internet process, and it's void, broken up by disaster. How does that affect the actual route the internet took?
Okay, so first of all, one thing I've learned is that every person you ever interview has a new theory of AT&T. Full theory to explain what happened in that firm. The second thing to recognize, the oddest institutional situation that's impossible, again, to explain to your kids, which is Judge Harold. Wait, I just don't know how to explain this to anyone. It's just too weird an institutional situation. The computer 2 regs, right? I've had this conversation for a long time, and I really learned from Bob Cannon about this. So computer 2, there was a low transactions cost interconnection with the telephone company. Telephone companies did not. Dial-up ISP was supporting a call that was longer than it was planned for, on average, and what the telephone company planning systems guys wanted, and changed their cost structure. It was, they were bulletin boards. They were just too small to matter. And so large became the source of most of the entrepreneurs who ended up doing dial-up ISPs. Very different experience than almost every other country in the world because no metering. Yeah, and that gave us a very, very different experience than almost everybody else in the world. And that,
All good questions, and we have time for more questions, but
open.
we have the auditorium and the atrium, and thank you all, and please join me in thanking.
Thank you for your comments. How do I? Is that fun?